A festive countdown at this Christmas tree farm in Solihull. But for Theresa May, her countdown is much more pressing. Just 3 days to go till a crunch Commons vote that not only could decide our future in Europe, but also her future as Prime Minister.
3, 2, 1.
She's trying to maintain Christmas cheer, but already MPs are talking about what happens when, not if, her deal is voted down.
Morning, Home Secretary.
Amber Rudd, the most senior minister so far, to break ranks today and publicly suggest the UK could be more like Norway.
I've seen that there is a lot of support for Norway Plus in the House of Commons. There's a certain amount of support for a people's vote. Nobody knows what would happen, and people should think very clearly, if they're not going to vote for the government's withdrawal agreement, whether they would actually prefer those alternatives.
Here, the Norwegian spruce is one choice on offer, but do we like their politics as much as their trees? The Norway option being suggested by Amber Rudd would keep Britain in the single market, but would also crucially maintain freedom of movement. The boss here, Graham, who voted to leave, says he couldn't embrace a Brexit if Britain's borders remain open.
The public was very explicit on what they voted for, and the politicians should listen to what the people have said. We wanted freedom of movement stopped, we wanted to trade with the rest of the world, and we wanted to stop giving them money.
There's little kiss and make up mentality here in the Leave supporting Midlands, but even here not everyone agrees with Theresa May's red line on open borders. Amber Rudd today suggested that we go for a Norway-style deal that would keep freedom of movement. Would you be happy with that?
Yeah, I'm happy with that, yeah, definitely. Anything to keep us in Europe. Didn't want to leave Europe in the first place anyway, so yeah, stay in Europe. Freedom to move about in Europe, no border control, nothing. Fantastic.
I'd prefer to stay in the EU, but I'd be happy if we did the Norway deal, yes. Because I want freedom of movement.
Yes.
We're quite European, we are.
Yes. So is he.
He's very Norwegian looking.
He's European
We're
as well,
speaking
yes.
on his behalf, obviously.
I think we need control of our borders, frankly. That's really what I think, yeah, and we need to make a lot more of our own rules.
I think that the deal will be rejected because it seemed by...
A few miles up the road at a meeting of grassroots Conservatives, I asked the former Brexit Secretary David Davis if Theresa May should resign if her deal fails.
She should go back to the European Union and say, look, this has been defeated, probably defeated by a reasonable number of votes, and therefore they want to do a negotiation.
Amber Rudd has proposed Norway today. Can that fly?
No, Norway Plus, as it's called, is Norway plus membership of the Customs Union. It might just as well be called Europe Minus, because it's all the liabilities, all the impositions of Europe, free movement of peoples, money, regulations. The one thing it lacks is us having any say in those rules and regulations. So it's actually actively worse than the European Union membership and actively worse than what's currently proposed even by the Prime Minister.
And you're not lining up to replace her. There's talk of a plot.
Is there? We haven't got time for a leadership election, as far as I can see.
Mr. Johnson, do you think Theresa May will get the deal through? Sorry. Do you think she should resign if she doesn't get the deal?
Another potential challenger, Boris Johnson, wasn't quite so chatty, declining to say if Theresa May should stand down if her deal fails. But that will be scant Christmas cheer for the Prime Minister as she faces an uphill task getting any deal at all.
Now, there is more and more talk of a second referendum, or a so-called people's vote, being called if Theresa May fails to get MPs' backing for her withdrawal agreement on Tuesday night. But what would happen if Parliament did decide to call a second Brexit vote? How would it work? When could it happen? And what are the options that people would be asked to vote on? Our political correspondent, Michael Crick, has been finding out.
This will be a victory for real people.
But what if we wound it all back? If Downing Street can't sort out the Brexit mess, then how quickly could we hold a new referendum? Not before the current Brexit date of the 29th of March, it's generally agreed. We'd need some sort of postponement from the EU to sort out all the logistics of a new referendum, then hold the campaigns and, of course, the actual vote. Former Education Secretary Justin Greening says it could be done in 22 weeks. And this time, she says, people should list the main options in order of preference. 1, 2, 3.
Either have the Prime Minister's deal, to leave with no deal, or to keep the existing deal we've got. I think those are the ones that should be put to the public. Of course, Parliament will want to debate how a referendum will work, but the process could be done for a referendum on the 30th of May, and that would then allow people to make their own choice about the compromise they want to make on the way forward on Brexit, given that Parliament itself is clearly in gridlock.
Hold on, it's not that simple, says this Brexiteer.
I would suspect, having looked into this in some detail as chairman of the Procedure Committee, that a second referendum would take at least a year, 14 months to deliver the actual vote on the night. So I think this talk that it could be done in 6 months is fanciful. In an ideal world, with everything running in your favour, that could happen, but clearly since this is such a contested area, it wouldn't run in your favour, and I would imagine that any question designed would end up in the courts anyway for a period of time.
There could be disputes too over spending and the secrecy of campaigns on social media. Only this summer did some of the Facebook ads emerge and rough costs, which the official Leave campaign sent to targeted voters in a multi-million-pound blitz towards the end of the last referendum. Some were factually dubious. One warned 76 million Turks might come to Britain, and that the EU threatened campaigns to protect polar bears. The Electoral Commission fined Vote Leave £61,000 for breaking spending limits. Some of the problems were first exposed by the campaign group Open Democracy.
Yes, I think absolutely you can introduce short-term emergency measures now for any immediate referendum we're going to have.
Such as?
Such as proper funding for the Electoral Commission, and such as making sure that the posters we put on social media are as accountable and traceable as posters that you put on a lamppost down the road.
So it says who's put them up?
So it says who puts them up, and that we can all trace the money that's paid for that.
There are other issues of trust in democracy. The X5 bus links the Remain strongholds of Oxford and Cambridge, changing drivers midway in Bedford, where, like the country as a whole, people voted 52-48 for Brexit.
Here in the bus station, you really have a tangible sense of parts of Britain that have been left behind.
Philosopher Tom Simpson says places like Bedford might respond badly if people thought their vote 2 years ago was being overturned by an elite from places like Oxford, where he teaches.
But what's at stake in the second referendum debate is whether these people, of whom I'm actually a member in one sense, stitch things up for the country and enact our preferences and protect our interests as a group at the cost of places like Bedford, where there's been a verdict from the country as a whole which says we want to leave the European Union, and we're at real risk of disregarding this verdict, and there's going to be a really profound breach of trust in the democratic process if this takes place. I think the consequence of a second referendum will not be riots in the short term, but it will be real populism, potentially quite ugly populism in the 2 decades to come.
How can asking the people be against democracy? Democracy is about asking people for their choices.
It's an attempt to overturn what they did. We don't like your decision last time. Do it again.
It's not an attempt to overturn the last referendum. We had the last referendum. The government's got on with that process. We now have clear options facing the country.
What's clear is that even for those who want one, a second referendum would not be the easiest of journeys.